So I'm joined today by my colleague, Annette Gordon-Reed. She is the Charles Warren Professor of American Legal History, as well as being a professor of history in the Faculty of Arts and Science at Harvard University. We're really excited to have you here, Annette. She has an amazing, amazing CV. I'm just going to highlight, if you'll let me, a couple of things for the viewers, right? One is she's a winner of the Guggenheim Fellowship, a winner of the MacArthur Fellowship, a winner of the Pulitzer Prize for her book, The Hemingses of Monticello, a really wonderful book, and we're just so glad to have you here today.
Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So today we're here to talk about legal history or law and history. I think we'll call it legal history, which is more common. And you, of course, are one of the masters in this discipline. And I thought maybe we could just start by having you tell us a little bit about what is legal history.
Well, legal history, strictly conceived, is the history of the development of law. And I focus on American legal history. So I would start at the Revolution, roughly the 1770s, and bring people forward. I typically stop around Jackson. I'm an early American historian, and that's the thing that I basically know. But it's the development of law, how we get from torts, contract, property law, how people thought about that in the 18th century, how they thought about it in the 19th century, and bring it forward.
And just to get a sense a little bit about it, how do lawyers use legal history in practice, and how do academics use legal history in the scholarly world?
It's funny you should ask that. Lawyers use history in practice in ways that historians hate. They call it law office history, which is basically, picking and choosing the things that you want to emphasize to make your case, as if you're writing a brief, for example. Historians don't do that. We like to think that we are more objective, and that I say like to think we are. We try to bring all sides into the question and really give a sense of the context. So it's not instrumental. I teach graduate students here as well as law students, and sometimes I have them together in the same class, and it's fascinating to see how they respond to the material, because the law students are always looking for a way to use what they learn to make a particular case. The instrumentalism of it is very, very important to law students, and it's not so much for graduate students who are sort of thinking about history in a broader term. There's no end result necessarily other than a particular thesis they might be advancing, but it's not we're sort of geared, I say we, on one hand I'm a law professor and I'm a historian, but law professors and legal students, law students are more interested in an answer for a client, perhaps, how you would do it in that sense. So it's a very different approach to the same kind of material.
And I sense a little bit of an uptick in interest among law students in legal history over, let's say, the last 20 years. Is this connected to the rise of originalism as a theory of constitutional interpretation? Is it just that we become more in touch or more interested in history in general? Do you have the same sense that I do, that there's a change?
I think that there is an uptick in it, and I think it does have something to do with the battles about how you interpret the Constitution, from people who see it as the original intent, and then the sort of breakup of that, people who say, no, I'm a textualist, no, and all different public meaning, textualists and so forth, versus living constitutional people. So I think that students are interested in that debate, and it's interesting, it's better to have that debate if you know something about those time periods, so it makes sense for people to go back, particularly in the era that I specialize in the early American Republic.
Can I ask you a little bit, if you'll let me, about your own intellectual biography? So how
Sure.
did you get interested in these topics? What was your path into this?
Well, my path into this was through a straight history topic, essentially slavery at Monticello and Jefferson. And so from there, I began to look at the society as a whole and develop an interest in Jefferson's time, in the age of revolution, in the age of the early American Republic. And so from that time period, you get the Constitution, you get the beginning of the development of American understandings about law, separating from English law. So it really grew out of the fascination, or it really grew out of my fascination with life at Monticello, the institution of slavery, which was a legal institution. And to think about that, law and lawyers operating in a system that we now think of as immoral, how does that happen? So those are the things that led me to think about legal history and the development of law more generally.
And imagine you were talking to a student who's just getting here or just interested in law and says, well, I see what Annette Gordon-Reed does, and that's really what I want to do. I want to learn about legal history. It admires you, and I understand why. What would you say to such a student as just a starting place? Where would they start if they have no exposure to legal history up until now? What would be a good starting place for them?
You mean a book or whatever?
Yeah, something like
Lawrence
that.
Friedman's The History of American Law. That's a sort of an accessible text that takes everything from the beginning, largely trying to bring them the colonial time period, but bringing us forward. That's a good book to give a sense of the sweep of American legal history. And he comes through to the present, or actually the 20th century. So that's a good place to start, I would say.
So, I'm not a legal historian, and when I think about what you do, I sometimes imagine people in archives looking for documents and stuff like that, and I know there's all this digital humanities stuff. What is that really like, and how does a student kind of, at the law school, get training to interact with these kinds of documents and the like?
Well, the experience of the archives will be different depending upon what you're looking at. Many things are not digitized. Many of the things require you to actually go and open dusty books and cough and do all kinds of things, or roll microfilm or whatever. I mean, I love the archives. I'm an archive rat, so I appreciate that. I know that not everybody is. I was the kind of person who was upset when Google came along, and things I used to have to go down to Virginia and find, I press a button and there it shows, and I think, this is too easy in a way. I know everybody's not like that, and I'm used to it now, but there are lots of different experiences. You can have the old way, or you can do it the new way.
That's terrific. And when you start thinking about writing a book or writing a paper, right? So one thing that I find so exciting about what you do, but also a little bit terrifying, is that, when I write something, I kind of have an idea of where it's going to go, and I kind of know that at the end of it, if I put in the work, I'll have produced something that I like and that I'm okay with. Whereas to me, what you do, there's a huge amount of risk involved. You go in, you marinate, and you don't know what you're going to find, right? You don't know the shape of the project until you find it. Is that kind of an accurate expression of what it's really like?
It's an accurate expression, and not only that, there's so many dry holes. You can spend a long amount of time looking for something that's not there. You just have a sense, if you, particularly doing work about enslaved people, for example, that don't have a record, who did not have a record that they kept, references to them, you just sort of, they knew this particular family, or they belonged to this particular family. Just reading through the documents, and you may find something and you don't, but that's the thing. It's a gamble. It's all a gamble, and some people like gambling and some people don't. I don't like gambling in real life, but here, this kind of gambling I love.
That's terrific. Well, thank you so much, Annette, for sitting down and talking to us. We're really, really grateful for the time.
Glad to be here.